Max, the Beagle, was a seasoned pro at his job. He had been with Officer Carla Hayes for nearly 3 years and was well known among the airport staff. With his compact body and big brown eyes, he was an adorable dog, but there was nothing cute about his focus when he was working. Max had an incredibly sharp nose, and he took his duties very seriously, trained to detect a variety of items, especially undeclared food products, which could carry pests or diseases. He was the unsung hero of airport security. On this particular day, as Officer Hayes stood at her usual post near the customs checkpoint, Max was his usual eager self. His tail wagged gently as he watched the flow of passengers, his alert eyes scanning the crowd for any sign of something out of place. Max was always calm under pressure, a trait that had earned him the trust of his handlers and colleagues. But when it came to his job, he never missed a beat. His job wasn't just to detect contraband. It was to ensure the safety of the entire airport by keeping potentially harmful or forbidden items from entering the country. For Max, this routine check was just another part of his day. As the Rodriguezes approached the line, Max's nose twitched, just a hint of curiosity in the air. He wasn't sure what it was yet, but something about the family's stroller caught his attention. It wasn't just the stroller itself that stood out to him. It was the way it was packed. Max's trained senses quickly picked up the scent of something unfamiliar. It wasn't the usual smells he encountered, like the sense of fresh fruit or the occasional snack wrapped in a carry-on. No, this smell was different. Max's handler, Officer Hayes, noticed his change in behavior immediately. She had worked with Max long enough to understand when he was onto something. The dog's alertness wasn't the usual response he gave when passing by a crowd. He was focused now, his body tense and ready. His nose was leading him, guiding him toward the stroller in front of them. As the family slowly moved forward in line, Max's interest intensified. He gently tugged on his leash, urging Officer Hayes to follow his lead. Maria, who had been pushing Lucas's stroller absent-mindedly, glanced down, surprised to see the Beagle now directly in front of them. Max's small yet assertive presence startled her for a moment. She had seen service dogs around airports before, but she hadn't anticipated one becoming so involved in her family's journey. Max's tail wagged furiously as his nose sniffed eagerly around the edges of the stroller. Officer Hayes gave a small, knowing smile. She had seen Max do this countless times. His enthusiasm was always evident, even if the reason behind it wasn't clear right away. "Easy boy," she murmured softly, her hand resting gently on the leash. But Max wasn't stopping. His nose was going in every direction, inspecting the stroller as if it was the most interesting thing in the terminal. The family didn't know it yet, but Max had detected something. Something that was about to send the customs area into a brief moment of controlled chaos. Officer Hayes watched closely, her eyes narrowing as Max moved closer to the stroller, sniffing around the baby's blanket and the small pockets on the side of the seat. She knew that with Max's accuracy, something was likely amiss. Without any warning, Max made his move. His nose twitched one last time before he sprang forward with surprising speed and agility, jumping directly into the stroller with a single powerful bound. The stroller jolted slightly from the force of his leap, and the entire scene unfolded in an instant, shocking not just the Rodriguezes, but the other passengers nearby. Maria gasped in surprise as Max landed, right next to baby Lucas, who had been peacefully snoozing just moments before. Lucas's eyes flew open at the sudden movement, his tiny hands grasping at the sides of his blanket. For a split second, it looked like the dog was about to knock the stroller over entirely. But Max, being as well-trained as he was, managed to land with a soft thud without disturbing the baby too much. What happened next was almost comical. Lucas, still in the throes of waking up from his nap, stared up at Max with wide eyes. Instead of crying, as many babies might in such an unexpected situation, Lucas let out a giggle. It was a soft, surprised laugh, a sound that made both Maria and Carlos breathe a sigh of relief. The last thing they wanted was a frightened baby in the middle of an airport security check. Max, undeterred by the unexpected human reaction, seemed perfectly pleased with himself. He was sniffing eagerly around the stroller, not paying much attention to the baby at all. His nose worked overtime as he circled the seat and nudged the baby's blanket, poking his snout in places no one expected a dog to be. The soft, fur-covered tail of the beagle wagged furiously, as if he had just discovered the most interesting thing in the world. Carlos chuckled nervously, his eyes flicking between his wife, the baby, and Max. "Well, that's one way to get attention," he muttered, half in disbelief. Maria, still processing the situation, placed a calming hand on Lucas's blanket and smiled at the absurdity of it all. Her son, who had been peacefully resting a moment ago, was now wide awake, seemingly enjoying the presence of the eager dog. Max's actions, though surprising, were clearly not malicious. He was simply doing his job. But while Max was focused on his sniffing mission, Officer Hayes remained vigilant, her eyes narrowing slightly as she observed the scene. The customs dog's behavior was no accident. She could tell that Max had detected something important. She knew that despite the playful appearance of the situation, there was still a procedure to follow. She took a few measured steps closer, her voice calm yet firm. "Max," she called, gently tugging on the leash. The dog paused for a second, but didn't pull away from the stroller. His nose remained glued to the side of the seat, and his focus didn't waver. It was clear that Max had detected something in or around the stroller, something that, though harmless to most people, could be problematic for the airport's strict customs regulations. And as Officer Hayes began to look more closely, the family began to realize that this wasn't just a playful moment. There was something more to it. Max, ever diligent, finally took a step back, still wagging his tail, as Officer Hayes moved in to investigate. The Rodriguezes exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of what would come next. They had no idea that the small discovery Max had made was about to set off a chain of events that would turn this routine customs checkpoint into something much more memorable. As Officer Hayes radioed for her supervisor, Maria and Carlos stood in a quiet, awkward silence. Max, who had done his job perfectly, was sitting patiently by the officer's side, his tail wagging lazily, as if this entire incident was just another day at work for him. The customs area around them seemed to carry on as usual. Other passengers were making their way through the line, their interactions far less dramatic than what had just unfolded. Maria took a deep breath, still trying to process everything that had just happened. She couldn't help but feel embarrassed. Here they were, having just come back from a lovely vacation, only to be caught up in the most bizarre airport encounter. Of all the things to get caught up on, dried mangoes, she thought. Her mind wandered back to the sunny market in the small village they'd visited, where her aunt had insisted on gifting them the snack as a reminder of the tropical fruits the region was famous for. At the time, it had seemed like a thoughtful gift, but now, it felt like the start of an international incident. Carlos, ever the calm one, gave her a reassuring smile, though the light humor in his eyes didn't quite mask the unease he felt. "It's okay," he said softly. "It'll all work out. Just a little embarrassing, that's all." Maria nodded, giving him a small smile. "I know. I just didn't expect the dog to jump into the stroller like that. It was all so fast. I don't think Lucas even knows what happened." Carlos looked over at their son, who was now contentedly clutching his giraffe and staring up at Max, seemingly fascinated by the dog. The baby was too young to understand the gravity of the situation, but his little face was lighting up every time Max gave a little wag of his tail. It was hard not to find the humor in that. Here they were, caught in an airport snafu, and Lucas was having the time of his life. "Max seems like he's having a good time," Carlos said with a chuckle. "Maybe we should hire him as our family's personal bodyguard." Maria couldn't help but laugh, the tension in her chest easing slightly. Maybe. He'd certainly keep everyone on their toes. At that moment, Officer Hayes's supervisor arrived. A tall man in a sharp uniform, looking every bit the part of an authority figure. His eyes swept over the scene quickly, taking in the situation. Maria immediately felt a wave of nervousness flood her again, but she held her ground, reminding herself that this was all just a misunderstanding. The supervisor, whose name tag read Officer Dunn, nodded at Officer Hayes, then turned to the Rodriguezes. "Good afternoon, folks. I understand there's been a minor issue with some undeclared items," he said in a professional but calm voice. "I apologize for the inconvenience. We just need to process this properly, and then you'll be on your way." Maria nodded quickly, grateful that his tone was reassuring. "Yes, I didn't even think to declare the mango slices. It was just a gift we received, and I completely forgot about it. I'm so sorry." Officer Dunn gave a small smile, clearly understanding the situation. "It happens, ma'am. This is a very common mistake for travelers. The important thing is that we caught it in time, and we can handle it from here." Carlos, who had been listening intently, spoke up. "So what happens now? Will this cause a delay for our flight?" Officer Dunn glanced down at the package in Hayes's hand, then back at the Rodriguezes. "It won't affect your flight. The item will be confiscated, and we'll make a note of it in our records. It's a simple violation, but nothing that will prevent you from leaving. Once that's done, you're free to go." Maria sighed in relief, feeling the weight of the situation begin to lift. "Thank you for understanding. I really didn't mean to cause any trouble." "Of course," Officer Dunn said. "We're just doing our jobs. It's all part of the process." With that, Officer Hayes took the mango package and placed it into a small container for processing. The Rodriguezes were cleared, and it seemed like the ordeal was finally coming to an end. As they made their way toward the exit, Carlos gently nudged Maria. "Well, at least we're almost through. Just a few more steps, and we can finally get home." Maria smiled, feeling a bit more at ease now. "Yeah, no more surprises, I hope." As they walked away, Max, the diligent customs dog, sat by his handler, watching them leave. His tail wagged lazily, satisfied with a job well done. The Rodriguezes had made it through the airport's most unexpected checkpoint, and while it had been an awkward moment, they were about to board their flight home, safe and sound, with a story that would become part of their family's travel history. As the Rodriguezes walked toward the gate, the weight of the strange encounter finally began to lift. The airport, with its bustling crowds and bright overhead signs, felt a little less intimidating now. The tension from the customs checkpoint had faded into the background, replaced by the gentle hum of travel. People on their phones, others grabbing coffee, and families gathered at gates, waiting for their flights. But for Maria and Carlos, the surreal events of the past half hour would linger in their minds for some time. Maria looked down at Lucas, who had now curled up in his stroller, his eyes fluttering closed again as he snuggled with his stuffed giraffe. The little boy's peaceful expression made her smile, and for a moment she was grateful that he seemed completely unaffected by the chaos that had unfolded just moments ago. She and Carlos had been so caught up in the bizarre situation that they hadn't really considered how much it might have disturbed him. "Can you believe that happened?" Maria finally asked, her voice filled with a mixture of disbelief and amusement. She turned to Carlos, seeking some sort of confirmation that she wasn't the only one who found the entire ordeal mind-boggling. Carlos shook his head, a small grin playing on his lips. "I honestly never would have imagined that our return trip would involve a dog in a stroller, a package of dried fruit, and some very serious airport security. It's like something out of a comedy movie." Maria laughed softly. "Yeah, it definitely felt like I was in a movie. You know, the kind where everything goes wrong, but in the end, everyone's okay." "Exactly," Carlos said, "and at least we're okay. Nothing bad happened, and now we have a ridiculous story to tell when we get home." Maria couldn't help but chuckle at that. She could already imagine sharing the story with their family and friends, how they'd almost been delayed by a customs dog who had sniffed out a minor infraction involving a gift. It wasn't something they'd be able to forget anytime soon. In a strange way, it was kind of funny. But there was also something comforting in the way everything had played out. The customs officers had been kind, understanding, and professional. Max, the enthusiastic dog, had done his job perfectly, and while it had caused a bit of chaos, it had ultimately been handled with care. Maria appreciated the officers' approach, realizing that it could have been much worse. If they hadn't caught the undeclared items, there could have been fines or other consequences. Instead, it was a simple process that left her with a little embarrassment, but no lasting harm. As they neared the gate, Carlos stopped and turned to Maria. "You know, we should have taken a picture of Max," he said with a laugh. "He could have been a star. I bet he's the most famous dog in the airport." Maria raised an eyebrow. "You want to take a picture of him after all that?" Carlos shrugged, a teasing glint in his eye. "Hey, he did just save us from a potential disaster. The least we could do is thank him with a picture. Plus, he was adorable." Maria smiled, amused by her husband's lightheartedness. "I think you're the only person in the world who would want a selfie with a customs dog after causing an international incident." Carlos just grinned. "Maybe. But it'll be worth it. Maybe we'll make him an honorary member of our family." Lucas, who had now fallen into a deep sleep in the stroller, provided the perfect picture of calm in the middle of the chaos. Maria glanced down at him and then back at Carlos. "I think that's the best thing about this whole thing," she said softly. "We're all together, and we're okay. And at the end of the day, that's all that really matters." Carlos smiled, reaching out to gently squeeze her hand. "I couldn't agree more. So, let's get to our flight. We've earned this vacation's ending." As they approached the gate, ready to board their flight, and put the weird customs encounter behind them, Maria couldn't help but reflect on how unpredictable travel could be. The trip had been filled with moments of joy, excitement, and a few surprises, but none of them quite as unexpected as the customs dog that had leaked into their stroller. It was a moment they would likely never forget, a reminder of how life, much like travel, had a funny way of throwing curveballs when you least expected them. But in the end, it was always about how you handled the bumps along the way. And today, they had handled it with grace, humor, and a bit of unexpected adventure. The terminal, which had been filled with the sounds of travelers hurrying to their gates and exchanging quick goodbyes, seemed to quiet for a moment as the Rodriguezes stood there, a mix of confusion and embarrassment washing over them. Maria felt the heat rise in her cheeks as she glanced down at Lucas, still in his stroller, who was now gazing up at Max with innocent curiosity. The little boy had no idea why everyone was acting so serious, but his giggles had become a welcome sound amidst the tension. Carlos, though trying to remain calm, couldn't help but feel the awkwardness of the moment. "Well," he muttered to Maria with a nervous laugh, "this is not exactly how I imagined our return." His voice was laced with a hint of irony, but his eyes remained fixed on Officer Hayes, who had not yet taken her eyes off the small package of dried mangoes in her hand. Max, completely unfazed by the attention, trotted over to sit by Officer Hayes' side, his tail still wagging as if proud of the role he had played. He seemed to have no idea that his actions had created such an unexpected turn of events. The beagle was just doing his job. After all, it wasn't his fault the mangoes were tucked away in a stroller. His sniffing had led to the discovery of something prohibited, and as always, his instincts were spot on. Maria took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the area. People had begun to notice the unusual scene unfolding before them. A few curious onlookers had stopped to watch, their heads turning as they saw the interaction between the customs officers, the dog, and the family. Some smiled knowingly, others looked on with mild amusement, but all of them seemed to find something oddly captivating about the situation. Maria couldn't help but wonder if this was going to be a story for the family to laugh about, or cringe about, for years to come. After a few moments of tense silence, Officer Hayes finally spoke, her voice calm and reassuring. "I know this might seem a bit surprising, But please understand that we have strict rules when it comes to agricultural items entering the country. I'm sure this was just an honest mistake, but we have to take care of the issue before we can let you proceed." Maria nodded quickly, still feeling the weight of the moment. "I completely understand. I should have declared it. It's just, I didn't think about it. It's such a small thing," she said, glancing at the package of mangoes. She felt a little ridiculous, realizing that such a seemingly harmless snack was the reason they were now the center of attention. Carlos, who had been watching the situation unfold with a mix of disbelief and humor, finally spoke up, trying to lighten the mood. "Well, I guess next time we'll be sure to declare everything, even the mangoes we get as gifts," he said with a wry smile. "Can we expect Max to be back in action the next time we travel?" Officer Hayes, sensing the need to ease the tension, offered a small, understanding smile. "Well, Max here takes his job seriously, so you might run into him again. But don't worry, I'm sure he'll let you through without any more surprise inspections next time." The lighthearted comment was enough to make Maria and Carlos relax a little. While they still felt a little embarrassed, it was clear that Officer Hayes was handling the situation with professionalism and grace. Max, meanwhile, had resumed his role as the airport's canine star, sitting proudly by his handler, oblivious to the fact that he had just caused a ripple of laughter and mild panic in the customs area. Maria, still processing the strange turn of events, looked at Lucas, who had once again grabbed his stuffed giraffe and was holding it tightly. Despite everything, the little boy seemed perfectly content. Maybe he didn't fully understand what had just happened, but in his own way, he was keeping the atmosphere light. His innocence, paired with Max's goofy charm, had managed to bring some levity to an otherwise awkward situation. Carlos gave Maria's hand a gentle squeeze, offering her a reassuring smile. "At least we'll have an interesting story to tell when we get home." Maria chuckled softly, her embarrassment slowly starting to fade. "Yeah, one for the books," she agreed, her voice filled with a mix of amusement and relief. And with that, the customs officer turned her attention back to the dried mangoes, preparing to properly process the confiscated item while reminding the Rodriguezes once more of the importance of declarations. Though it had been an awkward few moments, it was clear that everything would be resolved. The family was almost through, with just one last step between them and the exit. As Officer Hayes gently tugged on Max's leash, the beagle reluctantly stepped back, but his nose remained keenly focused on the stroller. His tail still wagged, but his attention never wavered. It was clear that Max had found something that needed further investigation. The customs team took their job seriously, and even the slightest of irregularities was worth examining. Max's body language said it all. There was something here that didn't quite belong. Maria and Carlos exchanged uneasy glances, now realizing that this might not be just a simple encounter with a friendly dog. Maria instinctively moved closer to the stroller, her hand hovering over baby Lucas, as though to protect him from whatever was about to unfold. But Lucas, unaware of the growing tension around him, simply reached out for his stuffed giraffe, giggling again at the sight of Max, who was still busily sniffing around. That's when it happened. Max, still insistent on his search, nudged the side pocket of the stroller with his nose. The small compartment had been left partially open, and as he prodded it with his snout, something inside shifted. A small, wrapped object tumbled out, landing softly on the floor. It rolled a little before coming to a stop near Officer Hayes's boots. For a moment, everything seemed to pause. The gentle hum of the terminal faded into the background as everyone's eyes shifted toward the object. Maria froze, her heart skipping a beat. She had no idea what it was, but she knew it hadn't been there just moments before. The realization hit her like a cold wave. What if it's something we shouldn't have? Officer Hayes, trained to stay calm in situations like this, immediately bent down to pick up the small package. Her gloved hands carefully unwrapped the object, revealing a compact bundle of what appeared to be dried fruit slices. The translucent packaging, marked with foreign writing, confirmed that these weren't local snacks. It was something brought from abroad. The dried mango slices were neatly packed, almost too neatly. The distinctive tropical scent of the fruit filled the air as Officer Hayes examined the package. It looked innocent enough. Just a snack, right? But the problem was that Maria hadn't declared it on her customs form. And in a country where agricultural products were strictly regulated, even the smallest oversight could lead to complications. As the airport's customs officer processed the situation, Max sat back on his haunches, as if satisfied with his discovery. His ears perked up as Officer Hayes straightened, holding the dried fruit package in her hand. The dog had done his job well, as always, and now it was up to his handler to make sure the situation was properly handled. Maria's face flushed red as she quickly apologized. "Oh no, I completely forgot about that," she said, her voice laced with embarrassment. "My aunt gave us those mango slices as a gift for Lucas, and we just put them in there for the flight." She looked at Carlos for reassurance, but he too was momentarily speechless, caught off guard by the unexpected turn of events. Officer Hayes nodded understandingly, though her professional demeanor never faltered. She could tell that this was a genuine mistake, not an intentional violation. Still, rules were rules, and as part of her job, she had to address the issue accordingly. "Thank you for your honesty," she said, her tone calm but firm. "Unfortunately, these will need to be confiscated. It's standard procedure. We can't allow any undeclared agricultural products to enter the country." Maria nodded sheepishly, now realizing the gravity of the situation. "Of course, I understand," she said, taking a deep breath. "We're so sorry. I had no idea." Though the situation was awkward, Officer Hayes couldn't help but offer a small smile. It was clear that this was a harmless mistake, but there was still a job to be done. As she radioed for a supervisor to handle the confiscation of the dried fruit, Max, ever the vigilant dog, seemed to wag his tail as if to say, "Mission accomplished." The moment of tension eased, and Maria and Carlos shared a quiet laugh, realizing just how absurd the situation had become. They had spent weeks planning for their vacation, packing and repacking, only to have the trip's final moments be defined by a handful of dried mango slices and a very enthusiastic customs dog. Willowgate International Airport was alive with the usual buzz of activity on this sunny afternoon. The terminal was filled with families reuniting, friends waving goodbye, and business travelers hurrying through the crowd with their rolling luggage. Flight announcements echoed across the halls, some with cheerful greetings for returning travelers, while others warned of gate changes and delayed departures. It was the kind of chaos that felt both familiar and comforting to anyone who had ever navigated the airport's crowded corridors. Among the busy travelers was the Rodriguez family, freshly returned from their 2-week vacation. They had spent the past days lounging on sun-kissed beaches and exploring vibrant markets overseas, a perfect break from their everyday lives. But now their holiday had come to an end. As they walked through the bustling terminal, a sense of bittersweet relief hung in the air. No more beachside sunsets, no more lazy mornings, but a reunion with home, their own bed, and familiar routines. The family of 3, Carlos, Maria, and their infant son, Lucas, moved through the sea of passengers, pushing the stroller with the sleepy baby nestled inside. Lucas, a curious 10-month-old, had spent most of the flight napping contentedly, his tiny face a picture of calm. Wrapped snugly in a soft blanket, his little hands clutched his favorite stuffed animal, a well-loved giraffe that he seemed unable to sleep without. Maria gently rocked the stroller back and forth as they approached the customs area, where travelers would go through the usual security checks. Carlos, ever the protective father, kept a close eye on their surroundings, looking out for any signs of confusion or inconvenience. The last thing they needed after a long flight was a holdup. Lucas stirred slightly, his eyes fluttering open at the change in movement. His little hand reached for the blanket, his tiny fingers brushing against the edge. The air in the terminal felt warm, a mixture of the hum of voices and the rustling of suitcases. It was the kind of atmosphere that could make anyone feel slightly overwhelmed, but for the Rodriguezes, it felt reassuring. They were almost home. The last task to navigate before they could finally relax was the customs checkpoint. As they neared the line, Carlos scanned the area. The customs officers, dressed in crisp uniforms, moved briskly between travelers, scanning bags, passports, and paperwork. It was a routine process for most, but one that always carried a slight sense of tension. Everyone had been there. The small feeling of uncertainty when you're not quite sure if something you packed might raise an eyebrow. For some, it was a moment of nervous anticipation. For others, a chance to see if they could get through without any hiccups. Max, a beagle who was part of the customs team, sat by Officer Carla Hayes. His job was crucial. He was trained to sniff out a variety of prohibited items, from food products to undeclared agricultural goods. His keen nose was invaluable, making sure that nothing slipped past the radar, unnoticed. As the Rodriguezes stepped into line, Max's eyes lit up, scanning the crowd. And little did they know, their peaceful journey through the airport was about to take a turn in the most unexpected way. Willowgate International Airport was alive with the usual buzz of activity on this sunny afternoon. The terminal was filled with families reuniting, friends waving goodbye, and business travelers hurrying through the crowd with their rolling luggage. Flight announcements echoed across the halls, some with cheerful greetings for returning travelers, while others warned of gate changes and delayed departures. It was the kind of chaos that felt both familiar and comforting to anyone who had ever navigated the airport's crowded corridors. Among the busy travelers was the Rodriguez family. Freshly returned from their 2-week vacation, they had spent the past days lounging on sun-kissed beaches and exploring vibrant markets overseas, a perfect break from their everyday lives. But now their holiday had come to an end. As they walked through the bustling terminal, a sense of bittersweet relief hung in the air. No more beachside sunsets, no more lazy mornings, but a reunion with home, their own bed, and familiar routines. The family of 3, Carlos, Maria, and their infant son, Lucas, moved through the sea of passengers, pushing the stroller with the sleepy baby nestled inside. Lucas, a curious 10-month-old, had spent most of the flight napping contentedly, his tiny face a picture of calm. Wrapped snugly in a soft blanket, his little hands clutched his favorite stuffed animal, a well-loved giraffe that he seemed unable to sleep without. Maria gently rocked the stroller back and forth as they approached the customs area, where travelers would go through the usual security checks. Carlos, ever the protective father, kept a close eye on their surroundings, looking out for any signs of confusion or inconvenience. The last thing they needed after a long flight was a holdup. Lucas stirred slightly, his eyes fluttering open at the change in movement. His little hand reached for the blanket, his tiny fingers brushing against the edge. The air in the terminal felt warm, a mixture of the hum of voices and the rustling of suitcases. It was the kind of atmosphere that could make anyone feel slightly overwhelmed, but for the Rodriguezes, it felt reassuring. They were almost home. The last task to navigate before they could finally relax was the customs checkpoint. As they neared the line, Carlos scanned the area. The customs officers, dressed in crisp uniforms, moved briskly between travelers, scanning bags, passports, and paperwork. It was a routine process for most, but one that always carried a slight sense of tension. Everyone had been there. The small feeling of uncertainty when you're not quite sure if something you packed might raise an eyebrow. For some, it was a moment of nervous anticipation. For others, a chance to see if they could get through without any hiccups. Max, a beagle who was part of the customs team, sat by Officer Carla Hayes. His job was crucial. He was trained to sniff out a variety of prohibited items, from food products to undeclared agricultural goods. His keen nose was invaluable, making sure that nothing slipped past the radar, unnoticed. As the Rodriguezes stepped into line, Max's eyes lit up, scanning the crowd. And little did they know, Their peaceful journey through the airport was about to take a turn in the most unexpected way.